This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders that are designing our future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and today I've got Ken Polk on the podcast. Ken is the founder of Arlington, a multifamily office dedicated to wealth preservation and purpose-driven financial planning. He's also the author of the new book, The Spirit of Wealth Preservation, Leverage Your Finite Life for the Infinite Good. Ken's going to drop a ton of wisdom for anyone who's managing significant wealth, or simply if you want to create a meaningful family legacy. Ken Polk, welcome to the Authority Company Podcast. How are you?
Doing great. Yeah, great to be here, Joe.
Oh, good. I'm glad you're excited to be here. And so I want to start by talking about the idea of wealth and maintaining wealth and sort of your bag, wealth preservation. And I want to talk about in terms of like why that's so hard and why sometimes it could be just as hard as building wealth, because I'm sure people that go along their entrepreneurial journey, whether they're on their own or they're with a company, it's all about like building that wealth. And then there comes a point in your life like, oh shoot, now I got to do something to keep this. And we've all heard the horror stories. I'm old enough to remember the MC Hammers of our life that, who were on top of the world. Then all of a sudden, their house is getting taken away from them. So tell me about this delicate balance of building wealth, which is hard, but then talking about the preservation of wealth, which sometimes can be just as hard.
Yeah. And I think that is the big difference is you earn it, you build something, you sell it, and you have an event. And the reality is what you've done is really spend a lot of time with a business that, and you've heard it said before, kind of the elder child. And once you get to that point, you then say, okay, well, what am I going to do next? And really what happens is you haven't realized that there's a meteor coming into your universe. And the meteor is something that you are just not used to. So imagine that coming into your universe, add children to it, a family, generations, and it really becomes complex. And so what we see most of the time is that the financial capital is the focus. So everyone focuses just on financial capital. And the reality is there's other capitals, and the one that they focused on the least, spiritual capital, is actually the most important capital.
Let's unpeel that one. That's heavy. For a money guy, spiritual capital. Where are you coming? Did you just come from an ayahuasca trip, Ken? Tell me about this spiritual capital.
Yeah. So it was from experience. And what I mean by that is that I started Arlington at 25. So I had no clue. I always say I had a desk and a chair and solid ambitions. And so that was, but I learned from these families. So Arlington, we added families over time, and I would watch them. And as we all know, some questions are learned forward, some are learned in reverse. And so I got to watch all these families. And what I learned is that it wasn't about the finances. It was actually about the spiritual capital, which really is collective purpose. And so, and people I think sometimes get a little nervous when they think of spiritual capital, but really what it is it's the purpose that really holds the collective piece that holds the family together, just like a business. It's no different than a business. When you have unity in a business and you have a collective purpose, a collective why, it's amazing what happens. It's like jet fuel in the organization.
Wow. And, I want to go back a little bit because you mentioned the fact that you started the company at 25. And I know sort of the world we live in is a young man's game, but there's certain things where when a young person's involved, you're like, wait a minute, what is this 25-year-old? So it is funny how, we're always trying to kick the old guys out and old ladies out, but then all of a sudden we're like, wait, well, maybe we like old people handling our money. I don't know about a 25-year-old. What were those early, and you're laughing because I'm sure you probably run into so many times in those days. What was your, I hate to boil down things to selling point, but what was your selling point as a 25? Because like you said, you learned on your journey from 25 onward. What was your calling card at 25?
Yeah, it really was a very simple proposition. And that was that I would learn and get better every day. And then I would hire an advisory board with gray hair. And so that was literally, because really with money and being young, I knew very early on that it was important for me to add an advisory board, which really became a really important part of Arlington in the story of Arlington. And I always give credit to those people who were in my life. And I wouldn't be here without them, but they really were. They were the older generation that invested into me. And then with that solid ambition, would go out and tell the story, tell it often, tell it convincingly. And so, and honestly, I really, we joke about it, but honestly, I was just naive. And so I think sometimes when you're really young, it's just like, well, isn't that what I'm supposed to do? And so that was part of it too, quite honestly.
Awesome. That's great. All right.
Yep.
So you build this incredible company, Arlington. Let's give a little quick little plug. I mean, I don't mean crass here, but tell me
Yeah.
about Arlington real quick before we dig into the book a little bit.
Yeah, so we serve 80 families, and we have built that over time. It used to be 2 by 2 is what we called it, kind of 2 families per year. And now we have 80 families we serve. We have over 720 souls under management. So our assets under management are 15 billion, our assets under stewardship are 15 billion. But really, what we are looking at is the soul. Who are the people? Who are the heartbeats that we're actually serving? And so what we've done is really just built Arlington to be what our clients ask us to become. So I would just go ask them, hey, what do we need to do? What do we need to become? And so we have our own private trust company. We have our own tax team, own investment team. And so we really just have built out really investment excellence, the wealth management, and what we call legacy planning, which is trust, philanthropy, and succession.
Awesome. Well, it's obviously working. You work from 2 to 80, whatever. It's going well
Mhm.
for you, Ken. Led you to write the book, The Spirit of Wealth Preservation, and you break things down into laws.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna have to read this first law because
Yep.
it's a heavy one, and I want you to sort of break it down for me a little bit. But you state the footprint of your life will become the blueprint of your legacy. Tell me about this blueprint and how it will kind of fuel and sort of be the roadmap for legacy.
Yeah. And so the word legacy, we hear it a lot. And really, if you think deeply about legacy, it really is who you are once you're gone. And who you are once you're gone really all is about the footprint and the blueprint that you left for the future. So the legacy part of it is whatever your steps are, that is actually going to be what you're remembered by in the legacy. And so really, and I start the book with this, and I know people have heard this before. And so it starts with an obituary, writing your own obituary, which is a powerful exercise that actually people have heard. A lot haven't done. I recommend people do it. It's actually pretty exciting, even though it's not talking about living. But and you can even call it a farewell letter or a letter to my future self. And so I think that's the power in it, is how can you create a framework to put out your aspirational dependability, strategic thinking, I'm a giver, and then also work backwards from there. So law number one really is about your footprint is your blueprint for that legacy.
That's good. I want to get into collective purpose because I think sometimes we often love to broad strokes things and like say like every age is the same, every race is the same, every community is the same. But as we all know, we're not a monolith. We all have different feelings. We all have different aspirations, and the same goes for families. So
Mhm.
tell me about finding that collective purpose within a family. And I know, Ken, you deal with a lot of high leverage individuals, so there could walking in the door, maybe a lot of people have that collective purpose, but I don't think many do, just because the family's not the old fashioned 1950s nuclear family with a mother and father and a dog and then two kids and picket fence. It's life is more complicated than it used to be. So tell me about finding this collective purpose when it comes to working with families.
Yeah. And I think this part will actually surprise the reader because of what I've learned over the years is the collective purpose is actually about a system in order to create in the future generations their own set of values. Okay, so follow me on this one, because if your collective purpose is the key to longevity in a family, and I've never been in a room and people say, I don't want to build a better family. Everybody says I want to build a better family, and you have a family regardless because you have your nuclear family, but you also have a family of affinity. So the family of affinity could be your synthetic aunts and uncles who play an incredibly important role in your family. So I'm using the family language, but at the end of the day, as far as collective purpose is that the importance is the matriarch and patriarch, the mom and the dad don't say these are your values. It actually is they if they live the values, they clarify the values. It's amazing what happens when they say, okay, now kids, go do your own clarification of values. And it's amazing. If you've done it, it's like, oh, well, they're actually pretty close because that actually is for a family their greatest concern. If you polled families, what is your greatest concern? They would say that my kids have my values. And the kids would say that, why am I here on earth? Especially the younger generation is, what's my purpose? Why am I here? So the kids are saying one thing, the parents are saying the other. And what it is the process is more important than you pushing it down on them.
I want to double click on those two words, live purpose, because I think that's the thing, probably, as you know, Ken, the hardest part, because, maybe with your company, you might have like values and you might have like a pretty poster in the office that states all these values, but people like to joke, even Enron had company values that
Yeah.
they talked about. Living the values, whether it's a company or whether it's a family, that's the hard part. Where do you come in terms of helping them live those values? And I'm not talking about like inner family squabbles and stuff like that, but how do you help people find that way that they live the values that helps those other generations?
Yeah, and I think this is the part where, and I asked the question in the chapter called Family Inc. Are you saving your best thinking for your business or your family? So it starts with a really kind of a framework, is like, because a lot of people understand that question. They're like, oh yeah, I saved my best thinking for my business. What if I did that for my family? So what we've done, and really we think it's an important part of the process, is we literally have a checklist to help people then build in a system. So, and what we found out is they're really universal principles. And it applies if you have $1 or $1 billion. It does not matter. Money does not matter in what I'm about to say. The first thing, if you then take your character traits under law 1 and you say, you know what, I'm going to write my obituary, I'm going to live it backwards, I'm going to write a farewell letter. Law 2 in longevity really comes down to 3 things. One is clarifying your values. The second is identifying your gifts. And the third is living on purpose. And so let me unpack the actual question, is identifying gifts. So everybody talks about purpose, purpose, purpose. And I always say, let's put purpose to the side. What if you identified your gifts? In Picasso, I think, is credited with saying it is, hey, you find meaning in life when you identify your gifts. You find purpose when you give them away. So I think people, if they could pause and just write their gift statement, I was created to, and people know what it is, whether it's organization or giving or whatever it is. It's incredible what happens when they identify it. So once they clarify their values and identify their gifts, then they can live life in this crescendo way where they update it annually, rewrite it annually, even if it's rewriting the same words as I was built to, I was created for. And so that really is it. We call it a build a better family checklist. And it really walks through those stages. And I always say, if that's the only thing we did for families, the money, I always say the money's easy compared to this part here, because, and it's really a life's work. Both 4 families I work for, as well as my family, is that it's the ultimate gift. There is no greater gift than giving a framework where that I can do it with my kids, then they can do it. And that's the power. And then they do it with their kids. So there's really just this whole, the process is so important as it relates to the different steps. So that's the how, the application piece of it.
Wow. It's funny, thinking back, the fact that you started this company in when you were 25, and if correct me if I'm wrong, that was 1998, right?
That's 1998. Yes.
What is in your water, Ken? Because you do not strike me as someone who's been doing this for almost,
Yeah.
30 years. How do you maintain such a youthful experience, appearance?
Yeah. That's
that
great.
you've done for so long. Obviously, you started young, but it's as Indiana Jones say, it's not the years, it's the mileage.
Yeah.
How do you do this all like this and still look the way you look?
Well, I think one of the things that I've always just enjoyed is the discipline part. So I always tell people, for me, I love discipline, whether it's physical, spiritual, financial. I don't know. It's just like exciting to me to be disciplined. I know I'm like, that sounds like I'm crazy, but it's the fun part of it. So I think that's always come a little easier because of the way I was built. I played sports that kind of taught me the discipline part of it. My dad was like that. He was very disciplined. And so, but I do take it as a compliment, Joe.
All right, good. Yeah, no, it wasn't certainly it wasn't anything. You look young
Yeah.
for your age. So,
Yeah.
I was just wondering, like, what's the secret sauce there? I mean, you're obviously working well with people's money, but you're
Yeah.
doing something well with yourself as well.
Yeah. Well, Thank you.
Well, that's good. All right. So 98 you start, you're going along, chugging along pretty well, and then '08 happens. The last Great Recession. We don't need to relive that whole thing. Obviously you got through it on the other side. But now fast forward to 2025 where we're in this world without getting into the politics of it of we don't know what tomorrow will bring because
Yeah.
it's that crazy. How do you manage all of these families? Again, we've mentioned they're all very different. They all, they all have their own values. They all have a certain thing they want to leave behind. They all have that footprint. But what do you say to clients now when unpredictability is
Yeah.
such a big part of the everyday life and something for, I'm a Gen Xer, Ken, unpredictability is very rare. I know the boomers might have had it a little bit in the late '70s and obviously the greatest generation, but like, man, for people now, this is a whole new ball game. So how do you work with these families dealing with the big U word, unpredictability?
Yep. And I think you hit it. It is like becoming, and I don't want to sound like the age I am, but it is becoming more unpredictable. And I think that is just the rising of the turnings, what they call them. And so right now we're in a period of very high unpredictability, and some would even say a little bit of chaos. So that's kind of where we are. And I think people sense that and feel that. And then when it becomes correlated to like investing specifically, I think it is actually a very important time where in because the a lot of people will tell you is that, hey, they can predict the future, but the reality is consistency, simplicity, and clarity will win the day. And so that part of it is something that I love. The thriving part of it is like when I see the chaos, to be able to add the consistency and the simplicity and the organization back to it. I think that is becomes really important for a family, for an investment portfolio, for really a business in general. Is in it. It's interesting. The consistency actually ends up winning. And I always say the tortoise wins the race, and the hare gets eaten for dinner. It's
All right, that's good.
okay.
And another thing that's new from the time you started, there's diverse ways of investing, way more war than
Yeah.
I remember. I was like, hey, buy IBM stock and you'd be set for life. That was like us growing up. It's a lot more complex, and so I'm curious with as these families grow, and you're also bringing in younger families. There's cryptocurrency and these other, investing overseas. How do you funnel all of that in terms of keeping people with their eye on the prize, but also being able to innovate? Because I think that's you get stagnation and innovation. You can keep things the same. Ken, I'm sure you can be like, hey, just let's do Fortune 500 companies, blue chip, S&P, all that stuff. But there's ways to innovate. How does innovation work in with Arlington?
Yeah, and I've seen Arlington over the years. It definitely has evolved in the way it invests. Early on, a lot of stocks and bonds today, private companies, private real estate, and all those. But at the core, kind of like the fundamental piece of investing, is still about the valuation of a company. So I always tell people we're in the preserve a fortune business, and so the families are looking at us saying, "Hey, compound the capital." And preserve for even the younger generation really want to say now humans speculate. So they always say just keep your speculation to about 10%, and the 90% is really about valuation and like what are the cash flows of the business or the stock, which is could be of course the business, and also the other pieces like real estate or private equity and others. So yeah.
Let's mention generations, Gen Z. You write about that in the book a little bit. Have we gotten a feel in terms of what's Gen Z's financial acumen is like? I mean, I know there's probably still, I think, on the high end and their lower, early 20s. But what are you seeing there in terms of their involvement with their families and the families you work with?
Yeah, and I see a lot, and I've seen this over the years, is really the economy, especially when they exit maybe their college years, will dictate really kind of how they feel because it's when they get that first job. It's like how hard was it, how easy with it, it's amazing how that impacts the way they think. Now, if they come from a home that taught them financial principles, yes, but the reality is there's not a lot of families that actually teach the financial principles, coming from the home. So what you will have differences, but what I can tell you about the Gen Z is they do look at money different. And so I actually the book ends with a chapter called The Future of Money. And what's interesting, when young people read the book, they actually, and they don't have children, and so family to them is like less interesting. They talk about the future of money because what they want the money in the world is to do good. Do good actually is as important, and you can do both. It's the and is the cash flows. So do both. Have cash flows, have a great business, but also do good. So I do see that difference in the generations very clearly, the younger generation, Gen Z.
Interesting. Oh, that's good. And what in terms of the younger families, one of the things that I've had many conversations with is financial literacy, and we see a lot of it, especially with like immigrant families. Maybe people that don't have as much money. It's like basically you're living check to check. So the idea of like thinking about a 401k seems like almost like another language they have to learn. What's the financial literacy side on these sort of high net worth families? Do they come in kind of like, because the reason I bring this up, Ken, do it like, do you know how, sometimes when let's say you have a plumber and you're the plumber's working and you look over their shoulder and you give your 2 cents and you're like, hey, should you be doing this? Do you deal with that since you're dealing with people that are very obviously successful and probably for generations to then have to manage the fact that these people may know a lot and maybe think they know more than they actually do?
Yep. Yeah. And I will say this, it is really important for families, especially that have the means, that have had a liquidity event or have wealth. It's actually to have very simple financial principles for their children. So for my household, it was really simple. I always call it the undefeated financial plan. And so, and I can teach it in 2 seconds. It's give, save, live. And so if you give, it just puts something in your heart that it's not all about money. If you save, then you never run out of money. So, and then if you live on the rest, so it's a force framework. Yes, it takes incredible discipline. Yes, you have to turn out all the other things that are buying for your money. But the reality is those who have the really simple principles actually end up winning in the end. And so the what we try to do is help the families with younger children. But my kids at 6 got jars, give, save, live jars. And then when they got 10, they got a bank account. I mean, so these are not rocket science items, but it's really just just doing them actually teaches them the financial principles. Because what happens, this, when you start earning money, your desire for spending goes way down. It's, so it's you're in the preservation mode when you're spending your money that you've earned, and so especially the young people need to learn that piece of it. So
That's nice. Speaking of the young and your kids, I'm just curious because you talk about and write about the fact that family's obviously very important to you,
yeah,
but you don't believe that you should have family members leading at Arlington.
yeah,
Tell me about that, because I think for most, the whole nepo baby thing was huge over the last couple of years. So, but there's always been a level of nepotism in business. I mean, it's pretty clear. It's from going back to plumbers. It's always Miller and Sons Plumbing. There's always been some facet of it. Tell me about the fact of this. Let's about the idea that you don't
yeah.
want family leading, you want to bring non-family members in. Tell me about that, because that is very interesting, and you do not hear that much when it comes to folks that have created wealth and created companies, because they're like, okay, I've created this for my next generation. They're going to jump in and join me. So tell me about that.
Yeah. And so I always tell people too, in this part is like, what I'm about to say doesn't mean I'm right. It's just the way that I've looked at it and I've watched other families do it. So it's been, for me, it's been very powerful to make a certain set of decisions. And so, really, if you look at the Arlington, the business, is we looked at it and said, okay, well, we're in the wealth management and family business. We're making promises. We have all active owners at Arlington, and we're making promises for children and grandchildren. So that right there actually is, I would never want one of our families to think, well, is really one of your children the best, the best to serve? So for me, I'm like a real practical, like that piece was real practical. And then I went and asked them. I would say, hey, what do we need to become? And they really said two things. We want you to retain incredible talent, and we don't want you to sell the organization. So all of that coupled together really became what I call the third path. And so I write about the third path. And like you mentioned, hey, you sell it, you transfer it to the family, but I say there's a third path. And it's been incredibly rewarding. So when my kids were 6 to 10, they would say, "Hey, am I going to work at Arlington?" And I would say, "No." And now the answer to your question, because it was my dream. It was my dream. And so what I want to do is give them the power to go fulfill their dream. And I believe there is now it can work another way. That's where I'm going back to. But the reality is the third path for Arlington, what's best for the families that we serve? What would they choose? It, and then the second is that if I could round the corner with my kids and help them understand that I want them to fulfill their dream, then that's the what's behind it. So really at Arlington, we're a family of affinity. So it goes back to the beginning is we all, we are very professional, but we also believe in family of affinity and family of blood.
Wow, that's so good. It's funny. I'm a big believer in the power of self-awareness, and I often say, we're really bad at it unless we really work at it. But where did your level of self-awareness come from to recognize this? Because again, Ken, you're knowing you're working with families and families that have businesses. I would say I'm going to venture a guess 99.9% of all have family businesses where all the kids and cousins are all working for the same company. Where did the level of self-awareness come for you to make that decision? Because I'm sure it doesn't just you just wake up one day, I'm like, you know what? My kids are going to work for the company.
Yeah, and it really was a journey. It was a journey, and I always say it was a journey of watching and listening and trying to help those families work through those things. And then as I sat back and thought deeply, I would think, okay, do I want to take the chance? So I'm a thinking in bets guy. So if you said, hey, there's a 50% greater chance that you could ruin one of your kids or ruin one of our clients' experiences, I would be like, it's not worth it. And so I'm an investor too, because so that's the part of the thinking and bet is that I want to make sure that I don't do anything that unwinds those things with the organization. And so that becomes kind of the driving force too, quite honestly, as I thought about it. So,
And like
but
you
the
said,
self-awareness, is important.
self-awareness is important. And again, not you said it, not that there's a right way or a wrong way, but why do you think more people don't think like that? And let's get into the hypotheticals here. Why do you think more people? Because the way you explain it, and Ken, as you can tell, I'm not a very bright guy. The way you explained it, it just makes so much sense of the reason why you don't have a family. But for whatever reason, you're the minority when it comes to that.
Yeah. Well, I never wanted to create an environment that forced my children to be around me. I wanted to create an environment that when they had the choice, they wanted to be with me. So there's just something inside of me that says that for me, fulfillment is like they actually can't wait to hang out with me. And so I see it a lot. I mean, in business, whether they like it or not, they're forced to.
Yeah.
And so there's some of that in it that for me, I just needed to settle that piece, and it's worked out well for me. And but I think that's a lot of times as people think, and also that is a generational thing. The generations I build a business, so and also it's different over the last 100 years because it used to be that families lived in a very close vicinity. And so they had a business. Today, there's more what I would call footloose. People are moving around everywhere, and so into these megapolises, and so it's much different today. So I think also if you try to take methods, not principles, methods, and apply 100-year methods and don't evolve, I think that's also where people they think a certain way, but if they sit back and reflect, it really is not what's best for the future.
That's good stuff. That's great. That's awesome. Thanks, Ken. All right, a couple more things. One, I want to get into mentorship a little bit because it seems like you are a mentor to your kids, but almost like, hey, you're mentoring with values, not actually like wealth preservation. And you write about how Jay Hughes was a big part of your life and your mentorship, and a lot of your fundamentals came from that. Let's go for the past, the present. So tell me about how the importance of Jay on your life, and then how you plan to pay it forward in terms of you mentoring the next gen.
Yeah. So Jay Hughes, I called him a year into Arlington. Again, I had promised the clients I'm going to go find, the two clients that I was going to go find an advisory board with gray hair. And he was the person who wrote the book, Family Wealth, Keeping It in the Family. So that I called him, I cold called him, and he said, I will give you 15 minutes. And so he gave me 15 minutes, and I shared the vision with him. And he said, I'll call you back in a week from now at 2:00 on a Tuesday. And I thought, he'll never call me back. But I was sitting by my phone. It was like the old time, sitting by my phone. And he called me. And what I did is he took me on this journey. And I often tell people he's the co-founder. He doesn't own any of Arlington, but I call him the co-founder because he's the co-founder of the heart and soul of Arlington, because he took me in and taught me 20 years in advance of where I was. And it was so powerful. And so I always tell, when people come and ask me about a board or an advisory board, I tell them, I can tell you the two key characteristics. If you want a fantastic advisory board, you want it to do incredibly well, what I would say is there's two key characteristics. Number one is that they love you. I mean, they just love you enough so you won't run off of a cliff. That's the kind of, and then the second is that you're effectuating their dream through your organization. You have the same dream. If you have those two things in an advisory board member, it is amazing what happens. It's like, it's incredible. So Jay was a big part of that. He was really kind of our first advisory board member. He's in his 80s now and still on our advisory board. Just incredible wisdom. So that part of it has been really important. And then as it relates to, it taught me a lot about mentoring and the others. And at Arlington, we use a word called followship that I write about. So followship, there's 60,000 books on Amazon about leadership. There's 20 on followship. So what is followship? Fellowship is really a very simple principle, and it goes beyond the servant leadership. Fellowship is, I live to fulfill your dream. And I love it. So fellowship is, what is your dream? And I'm going to go help you fulfill it. And really that's the key ingredient for the team members when they come to Arlington and we interview, is like, hey, are they interested in the fellowship piece? Because it takes a special person to wake up and say, I get excited to fulfill other people's dreams. And so, yeah.
Good stuff. Good stuff. All right, Ken, I always wrap up these conversations taking folks behind the dedication of the book, and you dedicate it to our past, present, and future clients. Without you, Arlington would not exist. Tell me about why it was so important. You could have, obviously got the family you could dedicate it to. You could dedicate it to Jay, many people that have helped you pave the way. But why was it important to kind of give props to the clients here as a dedication?
Yeah, and that part of it was two things. One is, I always said I would never write a book, and so that's, never say never and I did. But when I did and reflected on it, the reality is I've never thought Arlington was mine anyway. And I just didn't. I just always thought of it as their firm. And so even though there's no ownership by our clients, it's owned by active owners, I just always thought it's theirs anyway. So I just thought, hey, the information you're about to read is really dedicated to the ones today, the ones the past that have passed, and then the future ones that are going to be finding and going on the journey with us.
Wow. All right. I kind of gave a compliment earlier, but I'll give you another one. Have you ever thought that you were too nice to be in financial services? Because you're just way too nice of a human being to be in this industry.
That's great. Yeah, that's great.
All right, I guess not. All right, his name is Ken Polk. He's the author of The Spirit of Wealth Preservation, Leverage Your Finite Life for the Infinite Good. Ken, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, enjoyed it, Joe. Good to see you, and thank you.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more information about Ken and our other amazing authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.